Virtues. A glorified aspect of all guardians who commit to a fight against foes and assisting their allies have been corrupted. Through selfish desire, guardians have strangled their virtues and transformed them into vices. Accompanying vices, guardians have taken on a new title of Conqueror. Conquerors focus on selfish spells and magic-infused weaponry, sacrificing their group-assisting role. Vices can be projected into the material world as grand weapons used to destroy and hinder targets while manipulating terrain. Hello everyone and welcome back to my second fan-made Elite Specialization video. This one is my own, once again. I have not made a video on anyone else's, and just a quick reminder, if you would like to submit some Elite Specializations, you are more than welcome to. You can email me, private message me on Discord, all the shebang, get it to me, and I'll make a video on it. Anyway, today I have my Elite Specialization for my Guardian. It was very difficult for me not to go in the supportive route, as I'm one who loves a classical priest/cleric role. However, I feel like Firebrand has given the Guardian an ample support route, so I decided to get out of my comfort zone when it comes to the Guardian and make a Elite spec that focuses more on damage and assaulting targets. So my initial concept reads: Conquerors corrupt their virtues into vices, which can be called into the world as weapons, similar to the tomes. Additionally, Conquerors gain stance skills, which focus on preservation and enchantments of the self, and Conquerors learn to dual-wield swords, gaining the offhand sword as a new weapon. Now the specialization mechanic reads: Vices retain a passive effect, similar to the base virtues, but they are also an active effect. These active effects replace weapon skills with a set of 5 unique skills, depending on the vice that is activated. While the vice is active, a power bar will deplete. If the bar fully depletes, the Conqueror will lose the vice. If one vice is activated, the other 2 will go on the same exact cooldown. Might be somewhat confusing. Basically means if you use the F2 and it goes on cooldown, both the F1 and the F3 will go on the same exact cooldown. Mostly because I felt that Firebrand tomes, there were just so many skills active all the time and just freely upon the Guardian and the Firebrand, so this might control some of that skill overload. Let's just jump right into the specialization mechanics. So my F1, very first F skill, which is typically Virtue of Justice, is now Vice of Rage. Its passive effect is the same: apply burning to foes every few attacks. Every 5th attack, you will apply some burning. The active, however, is Call upon a corrupt, blazing great axe. This great axe grants the Conqueror unique skills focused on heavy physical damage with an emphasis on chaining skills together for maximum effect. The cast time of this is half a second to conjure the weapon, its cooldown is 30 seconds, and the duration is 20 seconds. Likewise, the duration of each one of these vices is 20 seconds. So the auto attack for Vice of Rage is Smite, Unbound Arc, and then Descending Justice. Smite, basic attack; Unbound Arc, a basic attack. However, with Descending Justice, you do a large overhead strike and you deal stronger damage and a short amount of burning. I wanted this to be kind of slow hits, so it's half a second cast for the first 2 abilities, and then the final Descending Justice ability would have a lengthier 1 and 1/4 second cast time. And the radius, or the range, is 180, which I thought was pretty appropriate. The second skill is Tarnished Vortex. Spin around, striking foes around you. Deal increased damage if you strike an enemy with burning. Movement is slowed while this skill is activated. So you'll be spinning around, striking 5 foes roughly 5 times, dealing pretty large damage. And then if you strike them with burning, you'll do even more damage. The radius is 240, which I thought was a pretty fair sized. Next up we have Fallen Fury, which is a cast time of 3/4 of a second, a cooldown of 8 seconds. You leap to a target location, dealing damage and creating a crossed shape AoE. Damage is pretty normal, 240 radius, number of targets 5, and the duration of the field is 3 seconds. The actual leap can be 450, and I wanted this skill to be sort of a gap closer, or for you to keep on the enemy. You might also notice that the cooldowns of these skills are fairly low, because I wanted to keep the person attacking while they're in this vice mode. For the fourth skill, I wanted to bring somewhat of a harder hitter with a capability of keeping people in place. It's known as Uprising, has a cast time of half a second, cooldown of 9 seconds. Swing your great axe skyward, inflicting heavy damage on an enemy, applying cripple, and gaining retaliation. The cripple is there to make sure that they don't run away really quickly, and also retaliation is just a small little perk that I wanted to add on here. It also is 180 range and only affects one target. Doesn't affect multiple people. So just as a little note. And finally, we have the fifth skill, Growing Rage, which has a cast time of 1 second, cooldown of 12 seconds. Dig the Vice of Rage in a line beneath you, creating a burning scar, which grows over time. This does about 4 ticks of damage for 400. It applies some burning, and the overall growth goes from 250 to 450 and a final 650 range. This also is more of a linear AoE instead of a circle or square, and its duration is 4 seconds, while also granting a fire field. I also forgot to mention Unfallen in Fury, my third skill. I also intend that to be a blast finisher, which I didn't put on. Just realized that now. To combo with a fire field, of course. And next up, we have Vice of Consumption, which is replacing Virtue of Resolve. It has a cast time to activate it a half a second and a cooldown of 40 seconds. I did change its passive effect for this one. This passive is incoming healing is 3% stronger. I wanted to remove the passive healing over time aspect and just rely on your allies more often, or focus more on that. And the active is Call upon gauntlets of grand power to assault enemies from a modest range with an emphasis of poking damage while sustaining the self. Of course, its vice duration is 20 seconds. Moving on to the auto attack. The auto attack for Vice of Consumption is known as Collapse Vitality. This is a cast time of 1/4 of a second. I wanted this to be more spammable and quicker attacks. It does low damage, and it will strike the enemy twice. It will deal some damage, and then also siphon some life for about 300 in total. So if you got one strike off, it's 150 healing, and another one's another 150. Its range is 600. Overall, I wanted this also to be more based on damage rather than pure healing, which Virtue of Resolve is typically associated with. Second skill is Demoralize. Create a circle which steals boons from enemies and deals damage. Its cast time is half a second and its cooldown is 8 seconds. Moderate damage, and it will steal 1 boon per pulse. I want to say a couple things. It should last for about 5 seconds. I also think I messed up on the radius. Personally thinking, I think it should be 180. I think 240 is too large, and I might have just averted my eyes for a second and saw a different number, but there you go. Next skill, we have Speed of Lost Light. This skill will grant the user super speed while cleansing movement impairing conditions, and also when you activate it, it blinds nearby enemies. Super speed lasts for about 3 seconds. The blind will affect 3 targets in a 200 radius. The skill will remove Cripple, Chill, and Immobilize. Ray of Evasion is the 4th skill with a cast time of half a second, cooldown of 10 seconds, and this will shoot out a beam on the ground which increases in size over a short channel, but you also flip backwards, gaining evasion. This is a bit more of a defensive skill. And also, however many foes are hit with the ray, you will lifesteal. This affects 5 targets. The ray itself is 500, but then you do a backflip, which gives you like a 100 distance gap. Just for more defense. You become an acrobat. And the final skill for the F2 Vice is Consuming Fragments with a cast time of half a second, a cooldown of 9.5 seconds. This skill will launch a triad of fragments towards a target. Each fragment will deal damage, steal a boon, and steal life. The damage, moderate. Life siphon per strike is a little bit more powerful, and boons stolen is 1 per strike. The number of targets you could probably affect would be 3 if like 3 individual targets took 1 shard. The range is 600. It's a reverse AoE shotgun type of deal, like Call of Scorch Razor, and it has 3 total charges, and the cooldown in between charges is roughly 3 seconds. And there is the Vice of Consumption. Moving on to the Vice of Pride. The F3 Virtue of Courage has been replaced with the Vice of Pride. It has a 50-second cooldown. I've also been thinking of just like bumping it to a 60-second cooldown. Its passive is the same. It grants Aegis every few seconds, while its active is summon a colossal 2-handed flail to slowly devastate enemies and alter the battlefield around you. Its duration is 20 seconds. Aegis lasts for 20 seconds when it pops, and the refresh is about 40 seconds or so. The auto attacks include Burdened Swing, Doubled Effort, and Crushing Judgment. Burdened Swing and Double Effort are pretty basic. They deal high damage with a slow cast time, deals damage to 5 targets, and is a 210 range, while Crushing Judgment is much of a longer cast time with heavier damage, and it also applies a stack of stability to the Conqueror, establishing the thematic ties of sustaining yourself and being a defensive bulwark, but not necessarily for others. The second skill for F3 is Reversal of Damage with a cast time of 2.5 seconds, a cooldown of 7 seconds, and this will spin the flail in front of you, creating a reflective wall, which destroys projectiles, but damages the enemy who casts the projectile. Enemies can't pass the wall while this skill is being cast. Its duration and its cast time is both 2.5 seconds, destroys projectiles, and the reflected damage is somewhere around 380, while the length of the line is about the radius of 180. So, a bit more of a shield. Next skill up is Bountiful Strike with a 1-second cast time, an 8-second cooldown. It's a large hit, and it grants you 4 seconds of protection, 3 seconds of retaliation, 2 seconds of Aegis, 2 seconds of stability, and it has a range/radius of 210, and it can hit up to 5 targets. Pretty basic. Moving on to the 4th ability. Next up is Heaven's Gate, which might be one of my personal favorites. It has a cast time, 1 second, cooldown of 14 seconds, and it conjures a wall at a target location, preventing enemies and projectiles from passing. If an enemy comes into contact with the wall will destroy any defensive boons. It removes protection, retaliation, Aegis, and stability. The wall length is about 300. I forgot to add, but the actual range of the target location when you are placing it down, the range of that is about 450. The number of targets, I don't know why I have the number, that shouldn't be there, whoops, and the duration of the wall is 4 seconds. There you go. I wanted to, once again, emphasize the controlling of the battlefield and not necessarily just stunning people for 10,000 years. And the final skill is known as Gavel of Imprisonment, which also might be one of my favorite skills that I've thought of so far. It has a cast time of 1 second, and its cooldown is 16 seconds, basically meaning it can only be cast once every time you have this weapon up. Fling your flail forward. The first enemy struck will be imprisoned in a column of corrupted light. While imprisoned, the enemy cannot move, be healed, receive damage, or break out with a stun break. In a PvP situation, this would basically mean like you're out of the fight for 2.5 seconds. And in a PvE scenario, it means you do heavy breakbar damage. So once again, they're basically just out of there for a little bit. I could have made this even more powerful, but I chose not to. And it has a range of 240, the actual forward thrust of the flail. So those were the vices. Moving on to the weapon, which I'm really excited for. It is the Offhand Sword. The first and fourth ability for the Offhand Sword is known as Scorched Spirit. It has a cast time of 1 second, a cooldown of 24 seconds, and you strike forward, dealing damage, and the enemy struck will send out a blazing fireball behind them. The fireball will travel for an additional 450 while dealing lower damage, but burning them for 3 seconds. So a little bit of area of effect burning if you focus it right and prepare. And finally, for the 5th skill, we have Prepare Deliverance, a 2-second channel and a 30-second cooldown. Prepare an attack while blocking. If you are struck while blocking, retaliate with an attack and make your next few attacks unblockable. This is a 2-second block, and if you're struck, you deal very heavy damage, and you also gain the unblockable buff for 2.5 seconds. Just a little additional utility with the aggressive playstyle of the Conqueror. Now we're moving on to some wonderful utilities, which are stance skills for my elite specialization. I went for stance skills because I wanted this to be more selfish. That was hard for me to do. For the healing stance skill, we have Open Spirit, which doesn't have a cast time, but a 30-second cooldown. You heal for a modest amount. Over the next few seconds, all healing that is applied to you is 35% stronger. So they heal 3,000, and then incoming heals will be 35% stronger. Get those firebrands on you, and it lasts for 4 seconds. The next utility skill, we're starting to transition into like the proper utilities, quote-unquote utilities. First ability I'm going to present to you, I've made 2 versions, one for PvE and one for PvP. This stance skill is known as the Urge to Control. The top one is the PvE variant, and the bottom one is the PvP one. I first thought of PvP, and I thought it'd be really interesting to have a utility skill which allows you to steal endurance. But I didn't see too much value in that for PvE, so instead, for PvE, your next couple attacks daze an enemy, and successful dazes grant 2 stacks of might for 5 seconds, for a total of 4 might for 10 seconds. And both these have a 4-second duration. Its cooldown is 28 seconds, and its cast time is 1/4 second. The PvP variant, you'll have 2 attacks, and your next 2 attacks will destroy 25 endurance, and additionally still grant you might on a successful attack. So the only variant is that the PvE version will daze a target, while the PvP version will steal some, or not necessarily steal endurance, but destroy some endurance on the enemy. Next stance is known as the Hedonist stance, which has a cast time of 1/4 second, cooldown of 25 seconds. Incoming boons gain increased duration when applied to you, and during this stance, when an ally applies a boon to you, you gain a small barrier of 120. This lasts for 5 seconds, and the boon duration increase is 2 seconds. That means if you get might for 4 seconds, it'll now be there for 6 seconds. Next up is Supernova, cast time of 1/4 second and a cooldown of 32 seconds. You break a stun while unleashing an explosion of light, damaging foes and knocking them back. Additionally, you gain a light aura and reduce damage. The damage is about 300, the knockback is 320. Light aura lasts for 5 seconds, so does the damage reduction, and the overall stance lasts for 5 seconds as well. Dim Light, cast time of 0 seconds and a cooldown of 30 seconds. Become immune to blind, weakness, and vulnerability. Additionally, become a mobile dark field and steal life each strike over this stance's duration. It lasts for 4 seconds. The dark field has a radius of 180, and of course you're immune to those conditions. You don't deal life siphon damage. You just damage, and when you damage, you'll gain some healing. And finally, for the elite, we have Conqueror stance, a cast time of 1/2 second, and a cooldown of 95 in PvE and 125 in PvP. Channel a state of pure conquering might. While in this stance, your damage is increased, and you always critically strike. You'll consume might and fury when the skill first activates, but you can gain it back during its duration. Your damage is increased by 50% in PvE, 25% in PvP, and your chance to critically strike is 100%. This lasts for 5 seconds. I also created some traits for this elite specialization, so I'm going to quickly go over the minors and then into the majors. I'm going to go minors and then top, middle, bottom, as I did in my last video. Starting off with the minor adept, we have Conqueror's Birth. This just gives you all the mechanics and all the utilities and skills. The primary minor master is Bounty of Sin. You gain attribute bonuses when activating a Vice. With Vice of Rage, you gain 150 Ferocity, 150 Concentration, and then 150 Vitality, respectively. And the duration of these buffs lasts for 5 seconds. And the Grand Master minor is Fulfilled Reward. If a Vice's bar depletes completely, gain a boon when unequipping it. You'll gain 3 might with Rage, resistance with consumption, and 3 seconds of stability with Pride. The top line of my traits focus more on damage. So the first adept is Light's Shadow. Deal increased damage when striking an enemy from behind or the side. This is an 8% damage increase. The master is Enhanced Vulnerability. When you apply vulnerability to an enemy, deal a strike of damage. This does moderate damage. I was thinking around 370, and its cooldown is every 2 seconds. And its Grandmaster is Spirit of the Sword. You gain flat power, and when wielding a sword, gain increased power. And then if you also are dual wielding swords, you gain additional vitality. Likewise, offhand sword attacks apply vulnerability. So your base power gain is 150. If you equip at least one sword, it's plus 100. And then if you have an offhand sword and are dual wielding, you gain 150 vitality. The abilities apply 3 stacks of vulnerability for 5 seconds. The middle row of my traits focus more on survivability and brawling. The adept is Closing In. Receive less damage from foes at a closer range, and when critically hit, you gain a barrier. The reduced damage is 20%, or by 20%, while enemies have to be in a 240 radius for you to be receiving 20% less damage from them. Your barrier is 500, while the barrier is on a 5-second cooldown. Your master is Devoted Stand. This affects your stance skills. Stance skills grant resistance when they end. While in a stance, damage taken is reduced. Your resistance is 1.5 seconds, while your damage reduced is by 5 seconds. And your Grandmaster is Don't Back Down. Movement and parrying effects have a reduced duration on you, and while you have resistance, any damage from damaging conditions will heal you for a percentage of their damage instead of just not doing anything. So you have Cripple, Chill, and Immobilize durations reduced by 35%, and then any damaging conditions will heal you for 50% of the damage that they would do. Resistance still prevents any damage. This trait just means any damage that was prevented, 50% of it you'll be healed by. And the final traits I have come up with are the bottom tier, which affect vices. Adept is Starved Rage. When activating a vice, gain quickness for a short duration, and the first strike when equipping a vice critically strikes. The quickness is about 3 seconds, and the critical strike chance is 100. The master trait is Second Course. When stealing or destroying boons while using the Vice of Corruption, reduce the cooldown of your healing skill. All heal skills will consume any vigor you have, but it will refill half of your endurance bar. So if you steal a boon, you'll gain 1 second off of your healing skill, but you have to be in the F2 Vice of Consumption. And then your healing skills additionally consume any vigor you have, but they will give you like a flat endurance regeneration. And the Grandmaster is Selfish Pride. Activating the Vice of Pride grants you a Defiance bar. When a vice fully recharges, gain health. I remember in Heart of Thorns, they were thinking of implementing Defiance bars on player characters. They never did in the end, and I think it'd be a really cool feature if they did. Bring back player Defiance bars. The heal is nothing too much, it's just 600, which coincidentally is the same exact amount as the Defiance bar strength, which isn't a lot. I like wikied Defiance bars and it doesn't seem like it's too much. And those are my traits. Thank you everyone for watching my second fan-made specialization video if you've made it through. If you're enjoying these and you want to enter the little community-run fan-made elite specialization, please, please, please send in your fan-made elite specs. I just kind of did mine in a day, and it's kind of done. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Like the video if you liked it. Comment down below what you thought about Conqueror. Subscribe for more Guild Wars 2 content. I hope we get to see some submissions and hope to see some fun content from you all. Anyway, thank you everyone. I will see you guys in the next video. All or Nothing is about to come out and I'm really excited. Oh, the story's going weird places and I can't wait to see how this season's coming, I think, to a close. I don't know how many episodes left. Anyway, that's a whole nother tangent for a different video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, everyone! Down below, I have links to all things Guild Wars 2 for free-to-play players and expansion players alike. So if you or a loved one are interested in playing Guild Wars 2, check the links down below. And begin your adventure in Tyria today. See you in game!